The Menendez brothers case remains one of the most controversial and endlessly debated true crime stories in American history. To the outside world, the Menendez family represented wealth, success, and status. They lived in a lavish Beverly Hills mansion, moved in elite social circles, and appeared to have everything money could buy. Jose Menendez was a powerful and intimidating entertainment executive, known for his ambition, control, and relentless pursuit of success. Kitty Menendez played the role of the devoted wife and mother, attending social events and supporting her husband's image. Their sons, Lyle and Eric, were attractive, well-spoken, and talented, especially in tennis, where Jose pushed them hard with dreams of greatness. But behind closed doors, the household operated very differently. Jose ruled through fear and domination. He demanded absolute obedience, controlled every aspect of his sons' lives, and punished even small failures. Kitty, emotionally fragile and struggling with addiction, was often absent, detached, or volatile. The home environment was tense, unpredictable, and deeply unhealthy. The pressure on Lyle and Eric was constant. Their value seemed tied entirely to performance: academics, sports, appearance, and behavior. Lyle's early hair loss and bedwetting as a teenager were not just embarrassing details. They were physical signs of severe emotional distress. Eric, quieter and more sensitive, internalized much of the fear and anxiety, becoming increasingly withdrawn and dependent on approval. In the years leading up to the murders, the brothers' relationship with their parents reportedly worsened. Arguments became more intense, threats were allegedly made, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly volatile. Around the same time, Jose was seriously considering cutting both sons out of his will, which would later become a key point in public suspicion. On the night of August 20, 1989, everything came to an end. Lyle, 21, and Eric, 18, entered their home armed with shotguns they had purchased days earlier. That night, neighbors heard loud bangs but assumed they were fireworks or noise from nearby homes. Inside the mansion, the attack was swift and overwhelming. Jose was shot multiple times, including a fatal shot to the back of the head. Kitty attempted to flee but was chased down and shot repeatedly. The brutality of the scene shocked investigators. Spent shells littered the room, and evidence suggested the brothers reloaded and continued firing. After the killings, the brothers left the house, discarding their weapons and attempting to calm themselves. Nearly 2 hours later, Lyle made the now infamous 911 call, screaming and crying, claiming someone had murdered his parents. When police arrived, both brothers were hysterical, sobbing, and visibly traumatized. Investigators initially treated them as grieving victims, not suspects. This early assumption led to critical mistakes. No gunshot residue tests were conducted, and the brothers were allowed to move freely. 4 months after the murders, it seemed like Lyle and Eric Menendez had gotten away with it. Financially, they were suddenly free and extremely wealthy. Between the inheritance from their father and mother, plus Jose's substantial life insurance policy, they stood to gain tens of millions of dollars, enough to live in luxury for the rest of their lives. And, predictably to the public, they began spending extravagantly. They purchased luxury cars, high-end watches, designer clothing, expensive shoes, and even 2 connected luxury condominiums. They traveled frequently, entertained lavishly, and threw wild parties that became legendary in social circles. To the outside world, it seemed like they were enjoying a lifestyle funded by the deaths of their parents, a fact that only intensified public suspicion and anger toward the brothers. But behind the flash and spending, a storm was quietly brewing. The brothers had been living with immense guilt and fear, and that emotional pressure eventually became unbearable. Eric, the quieter and more sensitive of the two, eventually broke down and confessed to their therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. Rather than immediately reporting them, Dr. Oziel did something highly controversial. He secretly recorded conversations with the brothers in which they admitted to killing their parents. Many experts later criticized him for his lack of ethical responsibility. There are strong indications that he may have intended to use those recordings as leverage, possibly to extract money from the brothers or manipulate them in some way. The case took another dramatic turn when Dr. Oziel's mistress, who was aware of the secret recordings, alerted authorities. It was this action that led to the brothers' arrest in 1990, less than a year after the murders. From that moment, the Menendez case became a national spectacle, capturing the attention of the American public in a way few trials ever have. The trial itself was extraordinary. It was broadcast live, and millions of viewers across the country watched every detail unfold. Journalists dissected the proceedings in newspapers and on television, turning the courtroom into a media circus. The brothers' defense rested on shocking allegations. They claimed they had been victims of long-term sexual, physical, and psychological abuse at the hands of their father, José Menendez. They said that Kitty, their mother, knew what was happening and failed to intervene. Lyle and Eric testified in graphic and deeply disturbing detail, describing years of trauma, fear, and manipulation. For many viewers, especially at a time when public discussion of male sexual abuse was extremely rare, it was an uncomfortable revelation. Despite the depth of their testimony, disbelief was widespread. Many people had a hard time reconciling the idea of wealthy, privileged sons with the notion that they could have been abused so horrifically. Late-night comedians mocked them, talk shows questioned their credibility, and newspaper headlines suggested they were manipulative liars who had killed their parents purely for money. But inside the courtroom, dozens of witnesses came forward to support the brothers' claims. Teachers, relatives, family friends, and even neighbors described José as controlling, cruel, and frightening. Many admitted they had noticed signs of abuse and even sexual misconduct but didn't realize the full extent of what the brothers were enduring. The first trial ended in a hung jury, with the division falling sharply along gender lines. Women jurors largely supported the brothers' claims and favored acquittal, while male jurors were convinced they had acted with premeditated intent. This deadlock forced a second trial. However, in the second trial, the judge limited how much the brothers could testify about the sexual abuse, which significantly weakened their defense. Without the full context of years of trauma, the jury convicted Lyle and Eric of first-degree murder, and in 1996, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For more than 2 decades, the brothers were kept in separate facilities, a punishment that was especially hard on them given how close they had always been. They were finally reunited in the same prison in 2018, more than 22 years after their convictions, but even that reunion could not erase the years of isolation and the psychological toll of their incarceration. Recent years have added even more layers to this complex case. New evidence has surfaced that may support the brothers' long-standing claims. A letter written by Eric to his family 8 months before the murders described the abuse he was suffering and his fear of his father. Another man has come forward claiming he was also abused by José Menendez as a teenager. These revelations have caused people to re-examine the case in light of modern understanding of trauma, abuse, and victimization. The Menendez brothers' case remains one of the most debated true crime cases in American history. Opinions are split. Some believe the murders were motivated primarily by greed, while others see Lyle and Eric as victims who finally snapped after years of terror. Some occupy the middle ground, believing that abuse occurred but that financial gain was at least a partial motivator. What makes this case endure is not simply the crime itself but the questions it forces society to confront. The nature of abuse, the credibility of victims, the limits of the legal system, and how the public perceives guilt and innocence. It is a story of wealth, power, trauma, and tragedy, a cautionary tale that continues to fascinate and horrify in equal measure.